The sanctuary city called Eden was not entered without the express permission of the authorities. It was a place where disease, deprivation became a memory of the past. Everything worked like clockwork. Citizens had jobs, access to education, full stomachs and clean minds. It used to be a settlement of a bright future. Today, for Aaron, it was just a prison with gilded bars. Eden's story began as an idea that seemed promising and momentous. A frightening rise in crime and social instability prompted the government to seek drastic measures. A plan was born that would nip these phenomena in the bud while consolidating power in the hands of a small group of decision-makers. The official description of the project sounded encouraging. Eden, creating harmony. The authorities claimed their goal was to create a society free of crime and conflict. Citizens were promised access to jobs, education, healthcare, and the stability they never had. All this was to be achieved through unique monitoring and control technology. Under the guise of fighting evil, the authorities decided to put into practice an intriguing experiment. The plan was based on a surveillance system that collected information about every aspect of citizens' lives, from their social choices to their innermost dreams. Every interaction was recorded, analyzed, and classified. The original purpose of the project was to predict and prevent crime, while promoting the overall development of society. However, Eden's real purpose was much darker. The monitoring system proved to be an excellent tool for controlling people's minds. The authorities began to introduce subtle manipulations, steering citizens in a certain direction. Gradually, elements that could raise doubts or resistance began to be eliminated. Those who tried to oppose this harmony were quickly eliminated, accused of treason, disinformed, and even subjected to secret experiments within the project. What was supposed to be paradise was becoming a sinister illusion. Society began to be governed not by its own choices, but by the will of the few. People were locked in a golden cage, and freedom and individuality were becoming a rare commodity. Many welcomed this new reality with enthusiasm, but some sensed the taste of falsehood. Individualism was treated as a mental illness. Eden's program board stated that since humans are herd creatures, any act of self-will that goes against their pre-established norms should be treated as a crime. Voices of resistance were few, but not silent. Groups of people who believed that human nature and freedom could not be erased began to challenge official narratives. But their efforts were futile. The system of control was too strong, and the authorities were willing to do anything to maintain their power. For those who dared to fight against Eden, the fate was cruel. Groundlessly accused of treason, they were stripped of their right to a trial and disappeared into the dark recesses of the system. In prisons that were supposed to be places of rehabilitation, they became victims of experimentation, and their last moments were filled with pain and the understanding that they had been swallowed up by the system that was supposed to protect them. After more and more transgressions against Eden, the authorities introduced a law that anyone who criticized Eden was an enemy of the nation and would be sentenced to death. Then more people woke up and took to the streets, but the police were just waiting for it. In front of everyone's eyes, they started shooting protesting men, women, and children, killing several thousand people. After these events, no one dared to protest anymore. This is how the ominous balance in Eden was created. Gilded files protected secrets and manipulation, while citizens believed they were living in harmony. But beneath the surface remained a group of people who vowed to restore true freedom and discover what was really behind the facade of this manipulated paradise. The message that flowed to the rest of the world was that in Eden everyone was happy and would not protest. If someone escaped and told how in reality people were intimidated, they died very quickly in an accidental accident. The whole world believed that Eden was a real paradise, because the propaganda was very powerful. Aaron's daily life resembled a constant rhythm. He would get up at a fixed time, exercise in front of the mirror, eat the exact same breakfast delivered by the vending machine, and then head off to work at the Citizens Assessment Office. Aaron was one of many officials evaluating what was left of people's private lives. Every interaction, choice, or comment was scrutinized to ensure that there was no room for anxiety or conflict in Eden. But there was still a certainty in Aaron's heart that something must be wrong. Alongside the glowing facades of the buildings, there were the inevitable snippets of rumors about mysterious disappearances and sudden transfers. Friends suddenly stopped hearing from each other. And the ubiquitous camera brought only the feeling of being constantly watched. One day, Aaron noticed a particularly sad look from an old woman in the park. The woman reciprocated the look and dropped her water bottle. Aaron walked over to hand it to her. Then the woman introduced herself as Hilda and asked him to listen to her. Ms. Hilda approached Aaron, glancing cautiously around, as if she was aware that their conversation must remain a secret. Her eyes glittered with concern as she began to talk about the genesis of Eden. She spoke quietly, trying not to cast suspicion. Aaron, you must know that Eden was not created for altruistic reasons. It was an experiment commissioned by the head of the powerful biotechnology company, Better Live. This man's name is Carl Mendy. He bribed everyone who was crucial to the implementation of this plan. He is the one who manages all this, controls society, and creates the illusion of harmony. Aaron shuddered at these words, feeling bitter and embittered. With each new detail, his conviction of Eden's falsity grew stronger. He asked curiously, "Is there anyone else who is against all this?" Mrs. Hilda directed a hopeful look at him. "Yes, Aaron, there are others who have not accepted the illusion of Eden. Those who believe that human freedom and individuality cannot be subordinated to secret plans. We are forming a resistance group, a group that will fight for true freedom." His heart beat harder at the thought of the possibility of actually fighting against the system that was about to subjugate him. "What can I do to help us?" he asked. Ms. Hilda looked him straight in the eye. "We need evidence, evidence of how Eden really works, who is behind it, and what their real goals are. There are documents at the headquarters of the biotech company that can disprove of this whole farce. You have to get that evidence, Aaron." Aaron was surprised that Miss Hilda knew so much, and at the same time it reminded him that Eden is not as safe as they wanted to convince him. "How do you know I have doubts?" Ms. Hilda smiled sadly. "I work in the department of checking and setting minds, Aaron. I know you have doubts, but I also understood that you were ready to oppose. I didn't disclose this to my superiors, realizing that I am capable of organizing this resistance group. Now you are our hope." Aaron's eyes flashed with determination. He knew he had to act, get the evidence, and, together with others, restore true freedom. The fate of the entire Eden society was now in his hands, and he could not fail this chance to reclaim his authentic life. As Aaron listened to Ms. Hilda's plan, he couldn't help a certain sense of unease. After all, this was no ordinary mission. "Why should I be the one to break in?" he asked, feeling he had a right to know the answer. Ms. Hilda looked at him with understanding. "This is not a random choice, Aaron. Your brother works in this corporation. He is the key person there, and we need someone who has access to the internal structures. Your relationship with him can help us get information." These words made Aaron bitter. He had lost contact with his brother for some time. They shared different fates and life paths. "Maybe it's not such a good idea," he said with reserve. "I haven't heard from him for a long time. I don't know if he will understand me. I'm not even sure he knows anything about what's going on." Ms. Hilda looked at him with empathy. "I understand your concerns, Aaron, but that's exactly why we are willing to take the risk. If your brother works inside the corporation, this could be our chance to access key information. We can regain real control." After a moment's thought, Aaron became convinced that he had to act. Perhaps this was just a sign that he should find a way to repair the relationship with his brother. "Okay," he said eventually. "I'll see what I can do. I'll try to find him and talk. I have to do it discreetly, but maybe I can get the keys to the company." Ms. Hilda smiled with satisfaction. "That's a brave decision, Aaron. If anything has changed between you, this may be your chance to meet again. Contact us if you get these keys. This will be the first step toward our fight together." From that moment, Aaron knew that the path he had chosen could lead him to many secrets, but also to a renewed relationship with his brother. A new determination filled his heart, and the decision to face not only the corporation, but also his inner fears, was already made. Aaron stood in front of his brother's house the next day, his heart beating in an unpredictable rhythm. He knew this would not be an easy meeting. Since that cursed day when he drove John, his brother's son, from the airport, their paths had diverged forever. It was just a moment of inattention, too much speed, and a tragic accident that took the life of a young boy. This event left a painful mark on the relationship between the brothers. John was his brother's only child, and his death was a blow that Liam could not bear. Of course, Aaron also missed John greatly, but he realized that he was responsible for the tragedy. Since then, he has not even dared to try to make amends. He recalled that moment. Rain was falling from the sky and the streets were slippery. Too much speed, a rush, and then the terrifying bang of the crash. All the while, he had the conviction that he had pressed the brake, but it didn't work, and the police found that the braking system was in working order. When he realized what had happened, his heart stopped beating for a moment. John lay there motionless, and Aaron knew he was to blame. After that day, the brothers did not speak to each other. It was a brief moment that destroyed everything that existed between them. In an instant, Aaron lost his nephew, and John lost his son. Even the shame and pain he felt prevented him from contacting his brother. How could he look him in the eye and confess that it was his thoughtlessness that took John's life? Now he stood there, looking at the door of his brother's house. He knew he had to do it, had to talk to his brother, although he had no illusions that this conversation would be easy. It was an attempt to make amends for past mistakes, an attempt to establish a relationship that would go as far as he could. It was a step toward forgiveness, though he realized that this would never erase the pain of loss. Aaron raised his hand to knock on the door. His hands trembled and his heart pounded in his chest like a hammer. He was ready to accept the consequences of his actions, as long as he tried to fix what had happened. He swallowed his saliva loudly and then knocked on the door. As he waited for a response, he knew that while this was a start, it was an extremely important step toward reconciliation. When the door opened, Aaron stood there with his muscles slightly tense. Liam, his brother, looked at him coolly and reluctantly, as if accompanying a stranger. Long moments passed in silence, during which neither of them could find the right words. Aaron felt that each of his words had to be balanced and carefully chosen so as not to expose himself to his brother's even greater anger. Finally, Liam avoided his gaze and walked away deeper into the house. Aaron followed him, leaving the thresholds of uncertainty behind. They sat in the dining room side by side, with a distance that seemed unbreakable. Apparently, Liam had no intention of facilitating this meeting. More minutes passed that seemed like hours. Aaron looked at his brother, trying to understand what was going on inside him. Finally, Liam looked at him and, after a moment of silence, began to speak. He talked about moments he once shared with his son John. He mentioned one particular afternoon when they built swans out of paper together, laughing and telling jokes to each other. It was one of those moments that left special memories in their hearts. Liam stood up and brought the swan he had been holding until today and said, "Because of you, this is the only thing I have left." Aaron listened attentively, and a mixture of grief and sadness shimmered in his eyes. He remembered this boy, full of energy and joy, who had his whole life ahead of him. But he was the one who took that future away from him, unintentionally, but destroyed everything. When Liam finished telling the story, there was silence again. Aaron looked at his brother, and then suddenly decided to confess. "If I could turn back time, Liam, I would. If only I could change it." Liam rose from his chair with a visible expression of rage on his face. "Turn back time? Oh, you're so smart now, aren't you? I don't give a shit, Aaron. Your grievances, your wishes, none of this will bring back my son." The words struck Aaron like a blow to the face. They were words of truth, words that tore his heart to pieces. His brother was absolutely right. All his desires to turn back time were nothing in the face of the pain he had caused. At that moment, Aaron saw the keys on a shelf in the corner of the room, near the door. It made sense. Liam worked at this biotech company and probably had access to many important places. Without hesitation, Aaron stood up and took a few steps toward the shelf. A plan was quickly born in his mind. He could do it. He just needed a moment to copy the keys. In the meantime, Liam continued his name-calling and shouting, and Aaron focused on the task at hand. He managed to get a copy of the keys, being careful not to draw attention to himself. When he returned to his seat, Liam was still sitting in the chair, still experiencing pain that had no end. Aaron knew there was nothing more to say here. Without another word, he stood up, put his hands in the pockets where he kept the copied keys, and headed for the exit. He didn't look back for a moment, even though he knew this might be his last goodbye to his brother. He closed the door behind him, and its rasping clatter sounded in his ears like a sentence. He walked away from this house where there used to be so much joy, but now only sadness and hatred remained. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to chase these thoughts away, but he knew it wouldn't work. He didn't look at the keys in his hands. He knew what they were supposed to represent. This was a chance to go back in time, to correct a mistake. And even though he knew it was impossible, that it was just an attempt to understand his pain, those keys were like a symbol of hope for something long lost. A few days later, on the same chilly night, Aaron again sat on a park bench, right next to an old lamp that cast a glow on the bench. It was no coincidence that the meeting took place on the same spot. Hilda had a penchant for consistency. "Aaron," she spoke quietly, lifting her gaze from under her hood. "Did you manage to get those keys?" Aaron pulled his hand out of his pocket, holding the copied keys in front of him. Hilda looked at the keys and smiled softly. "It's good that you're ready to act. Now, you need to know what to do next. You will find where they are holding the documentation and evidence of what is really going on in Eden. The most important thing is to get what could expose the truth." Aaron nodded, focusing on Hilda's every word. The woman continued. "Hand the documents directly to a reporter named Emma Reynolds. She is the only person you can trust. She has the power to publicize this and reach the public." Emma Reynolds. That name took root in his mind. It was the name of a person who could become the voice of those who oppose Eden. She was a person who had managed to save her independence in a world where truth was a precious commodity. Hilda handed him some notes with detailed directions to the company's headquarters and how he could get there. Aaron absorbed the information, filed it away in his mind, preparing himself for the challenge ahead. "You must be careful, Aaron." Hilda warned him, looking him straight in the eye. "This step you are about to take is dangerous. The people who are hiding this secret will stop at nothing to hide it. You must be strong and determined." Aaron sighed, knowing that Hilda was absolutely right. What he was about to do was risky, but he knew he had to do it. It was his way to repair at least a little of what he had destroyed. Leaving Hilda behind, Aaron returned home with a new purpose and new hope. Emma Reynolds became a character who represented everything he longed for: truth, justice, and courage. He had to get this evidence and deliver it to her so that together they could fight against the powerful corporation and their hypocritical reality. The day before the scheduled action, Aaron visited the cemetery where John was laid to rest. The cemetery was peaceful and quiet, with the wind gently moving the leaves on the trees. Standing in front of the grave, Aaron bowed his head, paying tribute to the boy whose life was cut short all too soon. Suddenly, he noticed a figure standing next to another grave. It was Liam, his brother. He was staring at the headstone, and his face seemed full of sadness and longing. This was the moment Aaron had been waiting for, the chance to meet his brother in such a place. He walked slowly away toward Liam, and after a while they stood side by side. Their gazes met, full of unspoken emotions and stories that left a deep mark on their relationship. Aaron could almost hear his heartbeat as he looked at his brother. "Aaron?" Liam spoke up after a moment of silence, his voice sounding muffled. "I didn't think you would come here." Aaron wasn't sure what to answer. He knew this meeting would be difficult, but he had to try. "Sometimes I wish we could turn back time," he said quietly, looking at John's grave, "to do things differently." Liam breathed deeply and turned his gaze downward, looking at the ground. "Yeah, me too." They were silent for a moment before Aaron turned toward his brother. "Liam, can I sit here for a moment?" Liam looked at him, and his expression expressed uncertainty. After a moment, however, he nodded. Aaron sat down on the grass next to John's grave, and Liam sat down next to him. "We haven't talked for a long time lately," Aaron said, trying to soften the atmosphere. Liam looked at him, and his gaze was full of questions. "That's true," he just muttered. "It's been a long time coming, but I'm here now because I need to tell you something." Aaron took a deep breath, preparing himself for the difficult words. "I want to do this for John. I want to do something that can help the people who are suffering in Eden. I can no longer stand by and pretend that nothing is happening." Liam looked at him surprised, but also with some hint of understanding. "What do you mean, Aaron?" Aaron gave him an envelope with the money he had taken out of his account earlier and said, "If I don't succeed, they won't be needed anymore. I want you to take them," and left. The long-awaited day had arrived. Aaron was ready to carry out his plan in action. One evening, when the streets of the city were plunged into darkness, he set out for the headquarters of the powerful biotechnology company, Better Live, whose activities concealed the dark truth about Eden. Hilda promised that another person from the resistance would turn off the surveillance cameras in the city. This would allow him to pass through the city without suspicion. In the company itself, Aaron must already cope alone. He entered the building through the back gate, hiding in the shadows. In his hand, he held a copy of the keys he had made by tricking his brother. He knew he had to act quickly and discreetly. The corridors were empty, and the only sound that accompanied his trek was the sound of his own footsteps on the marble floor. As he approached the office of the head of the company, his heart began to pound faster. Finally, he found himself in front of the door that was supposed to hide secret documents. He inserted the key into the lock and struggled to hold back the vibration of his hand. The door opened silently. He stepped inside and froze for a moment. The office was lit by the single light of a night lamp, and a stack of documents lay on the desk. Dressed in black clothing, he quietly proceeded to search through the papers. Piece by piece, he carefully moved his gaze across the pages, searching for evidence of Eden's dark secrets. Suddenly he heard footsteps coming from the hallway. His heart began to beat even faster. Without hesitation, he jumped under the desk, raising his hand to his mouth to stifle his breath. Time lengthened in unimaginable ways, and he struggled to keep from panicking. The office door opened, and two men in suits entered the room. In their hands were folders of documents. He thought they were company employees who were also working on something in the same case. He heard them talking, one saying to the other, "It won't be long before we get government approval for the Eden project to cover the entire United States. Soon, your plan will be fully implemented, Mr. Carl." Carl was the name of the head of this organization, the man behind it all. Aaron kept his hand on the legacy of the desk, keeping low, like a shadow. His eyes did not leave the men, and his heart was beating so hard that it seemed everyone must hear him. The men began to discuss, looking through the documents on the desk. Aaron hunched over every second, as if time was passing more slowly. Finally, one of them reached for the documents, which Aaron watched diligently. The men placed the folders on the desk and left the room. As the door closed behind them, Aaron leaned out from under the desk and took a deep breath. He had to act quickly. He took pictures of the documents with his cell phone and deposited them back on the desk. He then quietly left the office, heading toward the exit. His heart continued to beat rapidly as he crept through the halls until he finally found himself outside. He was now close to victory, but still in danger. He had never been so focused, so sure that he had to reach his destination. Finally, he saw the exit gate. He pulled out a copy of the keys, put them in the lock, and the door opened in front of him. He got out onto the street, where the wind swirled his hair. Breathing a sigh of relief, he put the phone with the documents in his pocket and headed toward the designated place where he would hand over the evidence to the reporter. He felt he was close to his goal. Obstacles and dangers had not fazed him, and motivation and determination still burned inside him. Now he had a chance to uncover the truth about Eden and help the people get out from under the control of a powerful biotech company. He found that it went easily, which surprised him quite a bit, but now his head was occupied with something else. He had to find M. That night, Aaron did not get any sleep. In the morning, he had to exercise as usual, eat and go to work so as not to arouse suspicion. His job at the Citizens Assessment Office consisted of translating those deemed enemies and sentenced to prison into one pile, and those deemed dangerous enemies and sentenced to death into another pile. Sometimes he wondered what the death penalty looked like. He had never heard that there were electric chairs in Eden or any other tools to aid in death, and yet a great many people were sentenced. The moment of truth had arrived. Aaron found Emma, a trusted reporter to whom he could hand over the documents. Their meeting was brief and tense. He handed her copies of the evidence, looking deeply into her eyes. It was their first and last meeting before the big reveal. The day when their unveiling was to take place was bright and hopeful. Emma prepared herself for the recording that was to be published in front of the whole world. If they succeeded, the world was to know the truth about Eden. However, on the same day that the publication was to take place, the police knocked on Aaron's door and transported him to the detention center without a word. Aaron was taken aback by the police's actions. He was sure that this was the end, that he would be detained permanently. However, in a terrifying moment, he realized that it no longer mattered. This very moment was about to unleash an avalanche of events that could no longer be stopped. Locked in a prison cell, Aaron waited for the fate that would befall him. Time passed slowly, and he was unsure what would happen next. He guessed that someone had turned him in, but he didn't know who. The most important thing, however, was that his secret mission would succeed. He was surprised when he was allowed to watch the news on TV. Then something began to happen that he did not expect. Emma didn't mention a word about the documents. This was surprising and worried Aaron. He felt that something was wrong, that something had changed, but he didn't know what. Suddenly, in the prison cell, there was a figure he unexpectedly recognized. It was Carl, the figure he had seen on the control monitors, the man who had all the cards in his hands from the very beginning. He looked at Aaron with a dismissive smile, and his gaze was full of triumph. "Your efforts were in vain, Aaron," Carl said with a wry smile. "We were one step ahead of you from the very beginning." Aaron felt the ground pull away from under his feet. He couldn't believe that all this time he had been bugged, watched. Carl continued, explaining to him that Eden was not just a crime-fighting tool. It was just a facade. In reality, Eden was meant to control society, to give the authorities the tools to rule them unchallenged. "Of course, every experiment needs victims, needs those who won't adapt to the new order," said Carl, looking at Aaron with pity. "And that's when our agent Hilda steps in. She tests those who think differently, who doubt the system, who raise questions." Carl told an increasingly frightening story. He told Aaron about how the mechanisms of eliminating society from bad elements work, what role people like Hilda and Emma play. And then he realized that it was all a closed circle in which he himself had become one of the pawns. "Do you think your move would have made any difference?" asked Carl piteously. "After all, we are the ones who define meaning. We are the ones who shape reality." Aaron felt he was powerless. Carl explained to him that Eden had already grown into a powerful force, that there was no escape. His last words were a terrible foreshadowing of the end. "Your life is about to end, and Eden will only begin its real activity." Everything he had fought for seemed an empty pipe dream. He was just one of many who tried to defy the powerful machine of control. His heart was filled with sadness and helplessness. Aaron squatted closer to the TV, expecting Emma to reveal the truth after all. But Emma revealed nothing. Her statements were predetermined, planned. Aaron felt even more alone. Carl was right. It seemed that all his efforts were in vain, that he had lost to a powerful force that seemed unstoppable. He was just a small pawn in a game whose rules were shaped by others. As Aaron looked at Carl, he couldn't help but ask, "How did you know? How did you know I was a suspect?" Carl looked at him with a smile, as if he had anticipated the question long ago. "I had my ways of always being one step ahead of everyone." At that moment, Liam, Aaron's brother, entered the cell unexpectedly. His presence came as a surprise. Liam looked at Carl and Aaron, and his gaze was full of pain and regret. "I have to tell you something, Aaron," Liam said, his voice full of emotion. "This is all that happened to John. It was my plan. I was the one who damaged the brakes on the car. It was the police who covered up the crash on my orders." Aaron felt the ground beneath him wobble. His brother, who had avoided talking for years, now stood before him with this terrible confession. Liam explained that when he was offered a job by Carl in a high position at Eden, he was very happy. It was a chance for a change for him. He could finally be somebody. But the choice was difficult, because the job required him to sacrifice his family. Working so high up in Eden, you can't have a family. You have to dedicate yourself 100% to Eden. Family is unnecessary ballast. He couldn't just leave his son, so he decided to take a drastic route. He damaged the brakes on the car Aaron was using to drive John home from the airport. "I wanted it to look like an accident so no one would know it was me," Liam said, shrugging his shoulders. "I wanted to work in Eden, to give you a better life." Aaron didn't know what to say. He glared at his brother, who stood before him, revealing a terrifying secret. Meanwhile, Carl stood there, looking at the family scene. "This is exactly what I feared, Aaron," he said haughtily. "People always have their weaknesses, their secrets. It makes them predictable." Aaron turned to Carl, deeply annoyed. "You are the ones who manipulated our lives, our choices, everything." Carl looked at him calmly. "Yes, because a world without Eden could not exist. Our goals were higher than individual interests." As tensions and emotions floated in the cell, Aaron looked at Carl with determination. "You will not succeed, Carl. You'll see." Then Carl just smiled mockingly. "Unless you have some aces up your sleeve, Aaron. But from what I can see, it seems to me that your cards have just lost their value." He leaned toward the cell door for a moment. Then a policeman entered, and Carl left, leaving Aaron and Liam alone. The emotions in the cell were unimaginable. Liam had told the whole truth, and now both brothers had to face the consequences of their choices. Eden's fate and the fight against him were now just part of a larger puzzle that, unfortunately, Aaron still could not fully grasp. Liam looked at Aaron with concern and spoke with frightening sincerity. "It's over for you now, Aaron. Eden will purify you, and then you will be declared a dangerous enemy and sentenced to death." The words vibrated in the air as the doctors entered the cell, prepared to perform their task. Without any words, they administered Aaron's injection, and a moment later, his body slumped to the ground, and he lost consciousness. When Aaron opened his eyes, he found himself in another small cell. Opposite him stood himself, identical in every detail. It was his clone, obedient, soulless. The terrifying thought that his identity and body had been copied echoed in his mind. Suddenly, Carl entered the cell, as confident and manipulative as ever. "You see, Aaron, this is the future. Man creates problems, and a robot no longer does. This clone has your memory, your habits, your skills. But it is programmed to always serve Eden, to always be in harmony with our goal." Carl's words sounded like a sentence, and Aaron realized that he was just a pawn in the game of larger forces. He wanted to object, but it was already too late. The doctor was entering the cell, giving Aaron an injection. He saw that last look on Carl's face, full of triumph and cold determination. Everything was coming to an end. Aaron felt his strength leave his body as his thoughts tangled and the world began to shrink. Finally, darkness enveloped him. The next day, a robot appears in the citizen's assessment office, perfectly imitating Aaron. No one has any idea that it is not a real person. Everyone looks at him, at his smile, at his manner, and no one guesses that it's just a program, pursuing Eden's goals. Carl announces what he wanted on the show at the Emmys, which is the news of the expansion of the Eden program to the entire United States. People on the outside receive this information with enthusiasm. After all, there is no crime and disease in Eden. The prevalence of technology, the uncompromising imposition of will, more and more inevitably brings them into the era that Carl and his corporation wanted to shape. An era in which human freedom and identity have been replaced by apparent order and harmony. Do you think, dear listener, that we are far from that?